It's cold outside and cozy inside, so off to the sewing room. This time I'm making two vintage style dresses using Butterick 6363, one in yellow rayon and the other one in a blue chambray. First of all, I'm ironing all the pattern sheets because they're really wrinkly fresh from the envelope. Make sure you're using the lowest setting and you're fine. I then trace my patterns using this transparent pattern foil because patterns are pricey and I don't want to ruin them when I'm messing things up. I'm using all sorts of fancy pattern weights, aka books, and other random stuff. After I traced all my pieces in a size that probably will fit me, I will check the measurements and see if I have to do any adjustments. I need to adjust the waist measurement here. I cut and spread, adding some width and redraw my pattern piece. Now all changes are done to the pattern pieces and I can make a quick fit check. I quickly pinning the bodice pieces and check the length and see if there's anything to adjust. I'm doing the same adjustments to the skirt pieces, adding a little bit of width and redrawing the pieces. Here we are, a finished pattern, and I'm ready to cut into my fabric now. But first, cat break. Here you can see me pinning and cutting and pinning, cutting. Of course, I also cut the pieces for my yellow version of the dress. When I'm done with the cutting, I'm marking all the darts, tucks, center fronts and so on, using waxed paper and a tracing wheel. I mark the notches with little snips. For some details I go over with a friction pan, which I can easily remove with my iron. Some pieces need interfacing, so I roughly cut it out, iron it to my fabric and then cut the pieces. The bodice pattern has a cut-on sleeve and it starts at a pivot point under the armhole. There I need to cut into, so this area needs reinforcement, which I marked on all my bodice pieces. I'm sewing a little line on all the bodice pieces just inside the seam allowance. Now I can snip into the seam allowance very close to the stitching line I just did. For the yellow version I used phrase stop to secure it even more. It really helped. The next step is pinning and sewing the darts into the front piece. There are two big pleats at the shoulder, which gives the bodice part more shaping. I'm pinning these, making sure that they perfectly align. After sewing them, I give them a good press, like always, because pressing is really important, right? Yep, it looks good. Now I'm ready for pinning the shoulder seams, making sure I match all the notches and the seams I just did. and then I'm stitching them. Here I'm pinning the side seams, making sure I exactly match the pivot point I just mentioned earlier. The yellow version has a side placket opening, so of course I don't stitch that, but pinning all the rest of this seam. Now it is very important to start exactly at the pivot point that I marked earlier. At the waistline of the bodice I also stitched some rows of gathering stitches. I'm pulling them to make the bodice fit into the skirt. Before I can join the skirt and the bodice pieces, I need to take care of the hem of the little sleeves. I stitched them invisible to the bodice using a slip stitch. I also decided that my dress needs some trim, and here I'm putting it on the sleeve, and I also put it onto the collar. Using my embroidery machine to do these little fake cross-stitch designs on the collar. Also the collar gets rickrack trimmed after I detangled it. Oops! Here you can see me grading the seam allowance of the collar to reduce bulk. And turning it right side out using my point turner. Et voila, a cute collar! Of course this needs a good press too, but the iron's not ready yet. Now I'm basting the raw edge of the collar closed. Moving on to the facings, pinning and stitching the shoulder seams. Now the collar is sandwiched between the bodice part and the facings. To make sure it will not shift, I'm basting the collar first, before I pin the facing on. The neckline facings now getting stitched to the self-faced front edge and then to the neckline. There's a lot going on in the seam now, so I'm grading again. I also understitched the facings as far as possible, shown here on the yellow version. Now let's do the skirt. It also has some darts, and of course they are stitched first. After the dots, I'd stitch the side seam and of course, pressing again. Now let's make the two parts into an actual dress. Making sure again I match all the notches and my seam lines and pinning them in place. For the hem I'm using a rayon hem tape. I stitched it close to the edge and I'm going to sew it down by hand. This way it's invisible, and this is also a very nice method often used in vintage garments. Time for button business. I found these buttons with roses on them on eBay for the blue dress, and those red ones from my stash for the yellow version. For the 13 buttonholes I got a little help from my Bernina. I use pins to secure the end of the buttonhole stitching to avoid cutting through it. I'm using a seam ripper to open my buttonholes. And then I sewed all the 13 buttons on. And that's a wrap. My blue dress is done. The yellow dress is similar to the blue one, but it only has 4 buttons and a side placket opening. Now all that's left to do is getting rid of cat hair and thread. And of course trying it on. And here we are. My 2 dresses are done. I'm really happy with the result and will definitely use this pattern again. If you liked my video and would like to support me, please like and subscribe. Please also check out my other videos. Until next time!